tokenized communities.
Hi, my name is Gloria Wu. So I'm one of the co-contributors of Orange Protocol. Orange Protocol is a open protocol that aggregates data in Web3 and also various types of reputation models to generate user-centered reputation proofs in the forms of NFTs or verifiable credentials.
Hey all, I'm Danny Zuckerman, one of the founders of Box Labs. We are the creators of Ceramic Network, which is a decentralized network for composable data, which is organized around users. Makes it really easy for app developers to build on a composable data ecosystem and gives users control of their data.
Hey everybody, I'm Johnny Howell, co-founder and product lead of Disco. Disco is a metaverse profiles product allowing you to collect lots of off-chain data for the verifiable credentials added to your profiles, connect your wallet to whatever apps you use in the future, and bring your data along with you. We're building on Ceramic, which we're going to talk a lot about it. I'm excited to be here.
Great, and I am Monty Calderon, Web3 student, also core contributor to Orange. Familiar with all of you because we talk somewhat regularly, I feel, especially in virtual spaces, about digital identity, reputation. So to get started, who wants to tackle what is self-sovereign identity? And then we can go from there. We'll flow with that. All right, there we go.
I'll go.
Oh, the nose thing was no.
So, self-sovereign identity, as you can tell, is like a big topic. I don't know that there is a real standard definition. I think there's been a lot of people who have tried to create a standardized definition. The way I would define it, and then, if anybody else up here wants to add on to it, that'd be great. I think of self-sovereign identity as the ability to, it's about control. And in the way that we have sovereign monies, the ability to not have it confiscated out of your wallet, be able to spend it where you want, those types of things. We want to do that same type of stuff with your identity data. So this looks like what your reputation is, be able to control for privacy. And there's a key thing that I always think about with self-sovereign identity. It's called the phone home problem. And when you're online and you use data from one app and another app, that second app usually calls the first app to verify the integrity of that data. That's how often these things work. And we are upending that model with self-sovereign identity, and that opens up a lot of doors for different user experiences and things to do. So I know that was not the concise little package for the definition of SSI, as we sometimes call it, but that's the way I think about it. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'd say when people talk about identity online, they mean literally dozens of different things, and we're not going to change that by defining it in one way. But they all have one thing in common, which is it's always about attaching information to an identifier. And the concept of identity comes about because we need legibility in systems that are bigger than just a group of us up here who all know each other. And so we need to be able to resolve information and attach it to a driver's license, a social security number, a user ID in a database in the user table. These are all just different permutations of dependably find information attached to an identifier. Self-sovereign identity means that identifier is controlling that information rather than relying on a third party, as Johnny talked about. We have a direct link between the identifier, whether it's a user or something else, and that information, and have a more trustless, more reliable system.
I'm just going to add maybe one thing. Everybody here is probably very familiar with Web3 and the corresponding meaning of Web2. So I read an article some time ago, which is really interesting. The article calls companies like Facebook or Google as identity providers because they actually have a lot of our data and they basically assign meaning to our data and create some sort of user profile. So they become a identity provider, which is ridiculous, right? So as we were saying in Web3, basically that client server is going to be your own storage using ceramics or using some other ways to store it, and then this way you can actually control your identity.
I guess I'll go. The way I think about self-sovereign identity is you become the DMV. Like instead of going somewhere and then someone saying, "Hey, that's who you are," you're like, "This is me," and I'm gonna like share it with you. This is me. And what does that mean? I think practically, this is the lens of Collab Lab. Let's say you are in some DAO, right, and you've done work. You could actually have someone within that group. You can have your own identity, but someone can attest that, hey, you've done a lot of great work, and that's using the same cryptography that we use on a blockchain. And so now, when I go from DAO A to DAO B, instead of having to start all over again, I'm bringing these like proofs, these like verifiable credentials, and these decentralized IDs, these DIDs over with me. I control and I own them, and I can disclose so that I don't have to start all over again. And so now what we're seeing with identity, I think I've just crept into reputation. It's like this big rabbit hole to fall into. I think that's why it's so difficult to kind of keep this at a conceptual level, but then also, what does this mean today for me practically?
Right. No, I was going to
Sure. So, I think one of the things that at least for me, leads as a next obvious question, especially as we were talking about identity providers, the Facebooks of the world, allowing us to create these identities that they're potentially portable, right? We're signing in with our Facebook accounts. How does someone in Web3 do the same, right? How do we generate these identities that then can be used across DAOs, for instance?
So every cryptographic key is an identifier. And so it's how do we use those to be the author of all of this data online and use it to bring it with us. Now, just a key on its own doesn't actually make for a really good basis for identity. You can do some things, but it's not durable, it's not resilient, you can't use it across different networks, it's very hard to protect privacy, so there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's a great primitive, but it's not the end state for identity systems. There are a bunch of advances past just a single key pair that you keep in a blockchain wallet that improve upon that. One of them that I think at least a few of us up here are building with is DIDs, decentralized identifiers, back from W3C, that was created by a whole bunch of different companies at the Decentralized Identity Foundation to basically have an interoperable spec for these cryptographic identifiers that can live on many different networks but still interoperate. So there's now dozens of different DID implementations. Now, how those are managed is still an open question with a lot of different possible answers. There are people that have tried to build identity wallets. Johnny and I both worked on Ucore, which was basically building an identity wallet for a very long time. Some of those still exist. The idea there is the way that you would have an identity, a wallet for your blockchain keys, you have a wallet for identity. What we have been doing at Ceramic, we think is a really good path forward, is to let blockchain wallets and blockchain keys actually become the authentication to these DIDs. So any blockchain wallet becomes the way that you connect, not just to use MetaMask or Wallet Connect, not just to get to your assets and send transactions, but actually to control all of your data and the permissions associated with them. There's a whole bunch of other possible routes too. I think that's the one that we see as the most promising and the kind of most streamlined UI given what Web3 is doing today.
Anybody else?
Exactly.
Covered it.
No, we covered it.
Very good.
Yeah, you covered it. All right. So, but I guess one thing to challenge the way that we create these identities and the way that we can use them is accessibility, right? So I think one of the things that we're seeing is, especially in DAOs in particular, is you have a group of active members, they're contributing, they're adding value to that community, to that project, but how are we making the use of these decentralized identifiers accessible, right? Because this all sounds great, but like at the end of the day, how do we get started, right? Are there ways to integrate DID straight into where the communities already are, instead of taking them out and building something separate and then trying to implement that back into the ecosystem? So I'm looking at you, but with Collab Lab, but if anybody else wants to take that, please do.
Cool, thank you. It's a very interesting question, and when, just to be blunt, when we started Collab Lab, we didn't think of ourselves as a DID provider or issuing verifiable credentials, but we now believe that like it's imperative. And when you're talking about, okay, DIDs, VCs, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of almost solved the production of them. And what you're talking in terms of accessibility is like the consumption of them. Like we need a use case to consume them. And so, fast forward, when we look at the success of Collab Lab and where we're going to go, do we want to be the next Facebook of crypto? I don't think anyone has that like interest, especially when it comes to Web3. So now we have this like kind of petri dish to experiment with. And so this is why I think it's going to be really exciting. And it's going to emerge from these communities.
Right.
So I think what will happen naturally, I think this will be a narrative, that you'll have a bunch of people in different DAOs. They're very much high performers or whatever you want to call them, and they're very successful. But they're going to want to like start something on their own. How do they do that? And I think what we'll do at Collab Lab is just issue DIDs and VCs, and this is part of the conference, and my kind of job is to kind of talk to the leaders here and like figure out the implementation details, and then just let people consume them however they want. And so with the, we have like 3.5 million wallets. Like that would be a great deployment playground to start out with. And so what does this look like? I don't know, but we're just gonna implement it and like just kind of have a balcony view and see how people start using it. And that's why we're here today. I don't know all the best of great ideas, right? It's actually going to come back to us if we just lay out these like primitives and these building blocks and let people use the Legos and construct, whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah, so that was great. I think to build on that, the accessibility, getting people using DIDs and VCs, that's, I'll try not to share my project too hard right here, but that's what we think a lot about is that experience of having, a decentralized identity, right? So that, back when Danny and I were working on Newport, this was like pre-Wallet Connect. It was pre the DID and VC standards from the W3C. And we were trying to build and experiment with a lot of those pieces, which now are pretty stable. And so now we can focus on the experience of having data that you own, which in like design world, there's this term, it's called responsibilization. Yes. And that's when you change a system in a certain way, and it shifts the responsibility from one actor in the system to another actor in the system. And that's what I think we're doing when we say, this is what we're doing in crypto generally, right? You become your own bank, right? Now you have this responsibility. When we take and put data in the hands of end users now for them to control, it comes with new responsibilities that they haven't had before. And that experience of having that responsibility is something that Disco is super focused on. So we look at every Ethereum address, every Solana address, every Tezos address already as a DID, right? So like you already have, many of you here already have DIDs, really. The DID spec can turn almost any key pair into a decentralized identifier. And one of the great things is it allows for us to tie a bunch of identifiers together so that you can earn reputation on Solana and then disclose it using your Ethereum address, and we really get this multi-chain future thing going, right? This data portability thing everybody talks about going. So yeah, I think it's time for. There's one other kind of, and this is kind of nerdy, but there was an update to how the VC spec, which is verifiable credentials, but these packages of data that are verifiable don't need to go on a blockchain. These are the packages that can contain that stuff about you that they can contain proof of contributing to a DAO. They can be your driver's license in the future. They can be a medical record. And because we're not putting them on chain, you have more privacy, right? So getting those things, a lot of times I think from a user experience level, looks kind of like, people like to see the object, have a tangible experience of the object of value. They like to see tokens with a nice ticker symbol and an icon. They like to see the NFT in their wallet. mean, we could have done NFTs in which everybody knows they have NFTs in their storage, and we just never show them, right? But that's no fun, right? You want to be able to see them and display them. Lots of people are building products to, have a gallery of your NFTs because it's an experiential thing. I want to do the same thing with your data and help people understand when they're receiving data, who has access to it. And I think we're going to end up needing that kind of like dashboardy thing, for better or worse. It's going to be the experience cost of having this type of freedom and this type of privacy and this type of autonomy does mean we're going to have to ask users to do a little bit more work in managing their data, and we have to make that as easy as possible, right?
So, one of the things that we're talking about here in as far as identity is concerned is both the ability to earn reputation, through these digital identities, but also the ability to connect these credentials, these verifiable credentials. Maybe we can just touch on briefly on how someone can do that, right? Because we're looking at onboarding with self-sovereign identity and reputation. So on the self-sovereign identity side, there are ways for us to accumulate or manage, some of these experiences, some of these achievements in a verifiable way, but still in a way that's private, right? And I think that I'll get to the question because I realized in the first panel I was like, what was the question? So hang on, give me a minute. One of the things that I realized in terms of this identity and reputation, all that is that, yeah, there's probably a good way for people to kind of get started, create their identity and reputation, but it's how do we allow for people to connect some of these experiences and defining it for ourselves so that we can understand how we can make use of this, right after this, right? So in terms of how we can connect these using verifiable credentials and how that remains private, right? How does someone do that? And maybe you can use one of your projects as an example of how that potentially works.
So I think from our experience, we were trying to see the vision of the space specifically, as James said, a lot of projects will be generating a lot of useful user data, and they'll be issuing out credentials, and there might be different data implementations, but how do you actually connect the space with supporting different implementations, supporting different credentials to be interoperable so they can all be recognized and linked. So I think Orange is trying to do that, and while we're trying to do that, we definitely see it's a very scattered and long-tail space because intrinsically Web3, I think all the leaders are talking about this and we're heading that direction. So every single project will now be saying, okay, your data is back with us, right? So we're all trying to make it open. So users can basically take their data around, but that means it's going to be a long tail of data provision in the space, and you sort of need something to connect them. So that's what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do, and we also realize it's also important to assign meaning to these data, and that could be a really big open question, because it's super subjective. There's different ways of modeling it, there's different ways of labeling it, and interpreting it. So then we try to also build out this tool for different model providers to come and say, hey, this is my way of modeling reputation. You don't have to agree with us, right? There could be new ways, and we're just one evolving space, and everyone is welcome to come and design and compete, or just try it out. So that's what we're trying to do. And one interesting case might be what we were doing with Snapshot. So basically, they were telling us a lot of DAOs are having issues of just how token-based voting is not enough for an effective governance. So we're saying, okay, so let's try something. What if a person's previous track records of how many votes he has casted in a particular DAO, and how many spaces this person is active on the Snapshot can be taken into consideration to how much his vote or her vote is going to weigh. So we designed this strategy as a sort of like a demo on Snapshot. But basically what you can do is, as a DAO, you can come to Orange and design your own model of interpreting a particular repetition and assign that, translate that into like a weight. And then the user goes and sort of like gain that repetition in the format of a credential or an NFT metadata. And then the project will just query that into the strategy of snapshot and basically weigh her vote. So I think this is something we're seeing more and more interest as the DAO space is really flourishing, and this could be something interesting as we're building more regenerative communities, as we say.
Yeah, one thing that I think is really interesting that Gloria said that's worth going deeper on is the adoption for decentralized data and reputation probably does look different than assets because assets are scarce by their nature. Data is abundant. And so the actions that people are taking to generate them or to claim or to manage them are going to be very different. And so data isn't necessarily something that you're going to ask users to go claim a bunch of credentials the way that they would go claim a bunch of NFTs or these scarce things on the blockchain. Rather, data is generated constantly every time we open our phones or use an application. It's like the emission trail of being online. And so I think the real key is how do we take that massive amount of data that's being created anyways, it's already there, but make it usable in more ways. And so the standards for how this data is saved and managed and modeled is what enables that. Instead of it just being modeled by, Apple has their definition of a step and it's on their database. Fitbit has their definition of a step and it's on their database. Every single use case, each company right now in Web 2 is defining their own data model for it, storing on their own database. When we flip it in Web 3, now you can store it on shared infrastructure, but also we can start to share the data models. We can sort of share the schema for how this data is managed by publishing it on an open network, making it discoverable, perhaps having signaling around it. Now you have consensus not just on the data, but on the data model. So it's really easy to discover how everybody is doing social graphs, how everybody's doing credentials for reputation. Makes it really easy for app developers to come build a new product or service, and instead of creating their own data model from scratch, they just pick and choose the best ones that already exist, and now they're natively interoperable with everything. And for users, every time they go to an app, all the data that's being generated is just attached, semantically described by that data model. They don't have to do anything except use the app, go to another application that's going to be interoperable. They don't have to do anything is a little bit strong. There's still a lot of permissioning and data management, like what Johnny's talking about, but it's not about creating and saving the data, it's about managing how it's used later on.
Well, I like what you're talking about in terms of data emissions. I say it as exhaust. So in a specific case of how we can use this right now, at Collab Lab, what we're thinking about is not just gating based off of the assets that you own, but gating off of, and we can generate these VCs where Collab Lab will attest that you are early Bored Ape, early Roll of Women, because it's not about you owning that asset right now, but maybe it was you had that role in that Discord server 6 months ago, right? When at the beginning of that project, that might be more meaningful than actually holding the asset right now. So we can gate on VCs, not just on the actual asset. And the asset provides this foundation where you now have what I call this data exhaust that's coming out of. That you have this asset and it unlocks different things. So if we're on Discord today and Telegram and maybe Reddit tomorrow and then GitHub and then all these other platforms that have APIs, you can actually see what you had access to. And that might be more meaningful as you build up kind of this data exhaust that you own. And that's what I think is important here that we talk about. This is why it's rooted in decentralized IDs. People need to begin to understand and learn how to control their own ID. So we think that that's a core principle in Web3 and that we hold really true at Collab Lab, and this is why we're forging straight into decentralized IDs and verifiable credentials because, we don't want this data.
Actually,
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's a little bit of an aside. Maybe hope we're not front running your question here.
I'm taking a lot of notes, and maybe you are.
But you said y'all don't want that data, right? So I think we're getting to the point where because of there's a hack of users' data like all the time, right? We hear about it all the time. Data in a lot of ways. For some companies, it's an asset. For Facebook, the data is an asset. For other companies, you might look at it as a liability, right? It exposes you to brand and regulatory risk. And now we have an alternative. A lot of the enterprises maybe, can be kind of cynical about this, but at least what I've heard on the other end of Zoom calls in this situation is, yeah, we just want to put it back on the user and know that they can't manipulate the data. We want to put it back on them. That way when they show up, they redisclose it to us, but we store none of it. And now we just have GDPR, CCPA, off our back, right? And I think that's an interesting dynamic is that as the regulatory environment changes, it actually is good for a lot of the stuff that we're all doing, right? I think that a lot of times those laws are in the right place. I mean, how are they enforced and all those things are, other questions, but, creating incentives at the state level that get these enterprises to push data back onto the users is probably good for the future of the internet overall, I think.
No, that's really good. So just to kind of harken back to something that you were saying, James, in terms of these VCs, is I think that I'd like to kind of circle back to is you go beyond just being a member, right? You're creating value, right? You're unlocking value from those experiences. And through that, you can earn or have incentive alignments that are maybe a little bit more aligned to who you are as an individual based on that Web3 experience overall. Doesn't matter what protocol you're using, it's as long as that's verifiable, that's something that can be leveraged by you to open up new opportunities. I think that speaks to reputation, right? So hopefully we've got a good sense of what self-sovereign identity is. I'd like to now explore the reputation element of this. How can we unlock that value through reputation? And what are some of these opportunities, maybe examples that you've seen of how it's being done today?
Yeah, so a couple of the big verticals where I'll focus on one. So I think everybody here is familiar with the future of work and the DAOs and things like that. And that's a real big reputation market thing, right? That's what job boards are, right? That's what a hiring process is. You're evaluating your resume, is your reputation. A lot of times people hire based on also they want references, right? And that's a common thing. Now you get into this social, kind of aspect of reputation more than it is just the raw credentials. If I went to X school and I worked at X place, now they want to also check, social references about is this person, a cool person to have at our company. I think that that's going to be, with as many people flowing into this space and learning, and DAOs needing doers, that is a match made in heaven, I think, for the emergence of decentralized identity and reputation. You have the pull of DAOs trying to find the right people. You have the supply of people trying to get into the space and prove that they've done this course or learned these things or have this knowledge. And people are building tons of educational tools to onboard people into Web3. That's what half of this conference is about. You want to be able to take the next step and prove you completed the last step, right? And so I think that that's where we're likely to see reputation start. There's lots of other places you might see reputation emerge pretty early because the financial incentives are aligned. So I hear a lot about the entertainment industry and fan loyalty and building up a reputation as a super fan with an artist or a creator, or an NFT, especially in the NFT space, and interacting with them across a lot of different touch points and whose APIs don't talk to each other. So you have to be your own personal API to them about what you've done everywhere. And I think that that's another interesting place.
Just to kind of segue off of what you just said, I mean, if we can automate that, it's just off to the races, then others can't compete in this future of work because it's going to be so dynamic, so quick. You're not going to have to coordinate. Really, that's what, in my mind, crypto really is. It's coordination reduction, whether it's a peer-to-peer payment or it's a DAO that's like executing a smart contract. I think that VCs and what we're going to see and what we're going to unleash in terms of reputation, we don't even can wrap our minds around it yet, but it's going to move very fast. Right? So like you see these headlines with DAOs being able to allocate or pull together a bunch of capital in zero time, right? We know that like blockchains are effective means of reducing coordination. We just have to thread that needle, experiment, and find out what is that use case, that shelling point that we can all get to quickly. And then it's just kind of, it's no looking back. That's kind of how it's inevitable. Is it like 1 month, 7, 10 years? I don't know. And so this is what the interest is in terms of like trying to be here at the conference, talking to people, like where is this going and what's going to emerge. So I think it's just like figuring that out and having these conversations. And we're very early. The clay is still wet. Like let's all participate. Let's all figure this out together and be engaged because it's going to get decided soon as people come. We see this conference here. It's like huge now, and it's only going to get bigger. So I don't know what the answer is. I know it's inevitable, and it's going to happen. Who knows when? But I think it's going to take us kind of experimenting a lot, and making a lot of mistakes, and being okay with that.
Yeah, I just want to build on what James is alluding to. So I have this observation that Johnny and Jenny have been working in the DID space for like years, right? And it has been a pretty lonely and silent space. It was never the center of attention. And there was DeFi summer, there was like NFT and DAOs, right? So I'm kind of hoping, because I've been in this space for some years, this is now the time for DID to take off. Probably because the context of all these other developments generating more and more useful data. Actually, some user behavior data are emerging in a really rapid speed, and so we're telling developers, hey, your project are generating useful data, do you want to issue credentials? Or users say, hey, you have all these data physically speaking about who you are, your education, do you want to use the IDs? But my big question is not there yet. We're still trying to convince individuals and developers to actually do that, right? So on that question, I think we're all on the same side. So, so my big question coming to December is also like, what have been the difficulties or challenges why people are still slowly adopting? I think that's the journey James is talking about. That's something I'm still trying to answer, and really welcome any kind of insights from the audience and everyone to tell us what should we do better to make you guys use it. And maybe also the question to everyone here, what kind of challenges you have experienced. And I'm sorry, I have to hijack your all.
This is a panel.
Because I really like to know,
Well, did anybody from the audience want to?
I'd like to add something to the conversation. I personally view SSI as a response to surveillance capitalism in the Web 2.0 space, right? Just as being these natural resources being mined up to me, I feel like it's very exploitive. And so, it's just a natural progression that I would want to have control over my identity in Web3 platforms and the transfers that were the security that offers me as a potential creator or something that has a voice in the space. Where I also come from a global citizenship background, and so some of the things that I'm seeing emerging is that this idea of global digital citizenship, right? So as a unified principle for self-sovereign identity. So how can we be these global digital citizens in these metaverse spaces? Like, what are some of the ethics and responsibility around that, and the kind of data and the visual footprint that we have in these spaces? And so for me, that's why SSI is important. I'm wondering if anyone in the panel has thought about this actually being a response to the exploitation of big data in the Web 2.
I can try. I think I won't try to repeat everything, but I think it was basically about how much of this is a response to surveillance capitalism and the exploitation of big data and big tech Anything else that I missed that's crucial to that? So, I mean, I think a huge part of it is that one observation from the last several points together is often the narrative in this general space is like identity and then reputation and then data. But you talk about we need to like have a lot of experiments and emergence and data exhausts. Like I actually think the order is the other way around. It's data and reputation is just like different algorithms on top of lots of data, and identity is just the way that you like compile all of that into this abstract thing that you call your identity or one identifier. And so I think that the power dynamics on the web are entirely strong, hugely because of how powerful network effects and data network effects in particular are. I think we still, despite the fact that we talk about them every day and that we are so tired of seeing news, still completely underestimate how powerful network effects are. And it has completely held back innovation online because switching costs are so high. And so it's not just about like the last year, especially because so much news about censorship by big tech. That is a tip of the iceberg compared to all the stuff that has never gotten built or posted because nobody can compete with big tech. And so to me, and this gets a little bit to what you said too, I think like it's not about trying to get users to take action, claim their identity, and start to get credentials because that's such a discrete solution to the problem, and it has to build up so far. It's about a new model for capturing all of this data exhaust and massive amounts generated all the time in a way that's interoperable and shared by everybody that can be leveraged by all these different applications, discovered and used, and pretty quickly the composability we talk about in DeFi, like the rapidity of innovation once you're building on shared foundations is going to be, and we're already seeing, but it's so fast, and the idea of a 10x product improvement that you hear about in Silicon Valley, got to be 10x better to get people to switch because the switching costs are higher. We don't have that in Web3 because I can use Zerion one day and Zappify the next, and the next day use both because they do slightly different things, but they're using the same underlying data. And so things get better so much faster. And so I completely agree with you. Like, it is a lot of exhaust and emergence to see what data models are working, and as soon as there's ones that work, on Ceramic, we had someone publish a social graph a month ago. It took off in China. Now a bunch of other projects are adopting the same social graph. You're going to be able to take your social graph with you across a dozen apps pretty soon. And so, is that the right social graph for everyone forever? Probably not. But it gives the ability to overcome the cold start for applications and build so much faster. And so, I think that's how we get past big tech and take back some of that control.
Yeah, so the surveillance capitalism thing is a huge issue. We think about it a lot. And I think it comes down to consent and privacy, which I don't think we've touched on yet. Like that's a huge thing for our team. And that is a hard problem to solve. I want to empower users that have all of this data. They're collecting it. That's in some form of, it's on Ceramic, or it's in, some other storage solution, maybe locally stored somehow. I want people to know who can see that. And when I connect to another site, what am I consenting to them, right? So I don't think I want to see a world where users find that relatively easy or have at least some control. You see it in all of the OAuth connection flows. They try and bury it because they want you to share as much data with the next app as possible. This is how the Cambridge Analytica hack happened. Or not, it wasn't really a hack, it was just a user exploit, right? It's a dark pattern or whatever. So that's something that we're focused on, which is when I collect a bunch of data from app 1 and I go to app 2, maybe I don't want app 2 to see all of it, right? Maybe I want it to see some subset, and we have to give users the tools and a good experience of being able to understand and make those decisions. There's a great kind of framework for privacy. It's called contextual integrity by Helen Nissenbaum that we think about a lot. And it's just it kind of has you think about privacy as a set of agreements that are progressive with some entity you're interacting with And anytime any of those levels of that agreement change, that is a violation of the integrity of the agreement. And so that's very high-minded and academic, and I know that, but we have to figure out a way to, at least in that spirit, capture that at the product level, at the experience level for a user. So, I don't want a user to not understand that they did something over here under one where they think that their identity is self-contained over there, and they don't know that they're essentially leaking their identity into all places of the internet every time they connect their wallet, right? It's the same. I'm sure, I don't know if we'll get there, but there's a lot of things to say about NFTs for identity and reputation, putting things on chain forever and exposing it to the world in this global way, right? I've seen projects say, we're going to put medical records on the blockchain. It's just like, no, please, don't do that, right?
At least 3 people in the audience say no.
Yeah, right. And so understanding when you start interacting with another party, whether that's an app or another person in some peer-to-peer social network, what can they see about me, right? So I think that's going to be a huge part as we collect more and more data. It gets harder and harder to manage, right? And so,
There's also this big movement towards digital minimalism. I think that people within that community would really want to have an SSI as digital minimalists, just to be mindful of their.
yeah, it's a part of, is it Christopher Allen who did the original SSI stuff? Yeah, one of those principles, if you go read his blog on SSI, Christopher Allen, one of those things is minimalization, right? And I think we gotta not lose that because we just want more efficient systems, right? Like privacy, unfortunately, from a lot of app perspectives, is a barrier to use. It's something that you don't want. Facebook does not want you to not share data with them, right? And so the incentives are a little bit misaligned here. And we have to make it easier for users to understand what they're sharing, who has access, how do I take that back, those types of things. And so yeah, I think we're all working on it.
You have a question?
I have another question.
Okay, I'll be real quick. I have somewhat of a hot take on this. I understand surveillance capitalism. I actually was at Zynga and launched a game called Farmville and saw that explode. I was like, oh, this is great. And then I'm like, wait a second, what am I really doing here, right? And this is what we're seeing too, with Collab Lab and pushing users essentially to Telegram and Discord, right? And I'm coming to this realization: can we live in both worlds simultaneously, right? So traditionally in Web 2, you think of these platform providers as we're in this online dark ages where we're just serfs tilling the land. We don't have any ownership over the platform, right? We don't have ownership of our own data like on Facebook, and that's how Facebook monetizes. This is where you get the notion of surveillance capitalism. But now with Web 3, how much of that NFT revenue does Discord see, right? So maybe it's this age of enlightenment or age of ownership now, where they're giving us free commercial real estate. Can we maybe work together? And it's that they will look at these tokenized communities and take feature requests. If they don't, there'll be another Web 2 competitor that will fill that gap, and maybe we move from Telegram and Discord to Reddit or to wherever next, right? So now there's this kind of this equilibrium. And I'm kind of hopeful for that scenario to play out. And because then what are you going to do? You're going to wait for these Web3 native tooling. And I kind of see that as throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing, right? There's maybe just things that we need to tweak 15, 20% to get this equilibrium.
Very brief. I'll try to do a brief hot take on top of that. I actually think a tweak in the incentives around data makes a massive difference because right now, a few providers have huge amounts of data that they can make massive amounts of money on because it's scarce, because they're the only ones who have it. If you get into a world in which users have control of their own data and can permission it out to all of the apps that they use, data is no longer scarce. Everybody has this really rich trove of data well formatted, guaranteed to be them, which is really not the case online today. It's a massive supply chain for advertisers. And if I want to, I can trust an app to have access to all of my data. Data is abundant. And so actually, the price or cost of value of data for anybody who's trying to hoard it has plummeted. So now they have less incentive to hoard it and try to exploit users. And so shifting the power dynamics a bit completely changes the incentives for everybody.
All right, and so,
There was a question.
oh, there was a question.
Yeah,
Please.
if I may have one more question.
Sure.
So a few of you have mentioned a proof of credentials or proof of experience. So I'm thinking in the real world, like if I've been contributing to a project or a DAO, the way I normally represent those credentials is in more qualitative form. Like I've done X, Y, Z. This is a really impactful initiative that I've delivered. But when I was looking into this kind of space so far, like most of the, like it comes from very quantitative data, right? Like how many snapshots have I voted on, how early I joined Discord. But I feel like there's a very big gap between the quantitative data, which can be very, very misleading. I might not be the most active person posting stuff, but maybe I'm not the best contributor. So how do you make the leap from like this quantitative world to the like more qualitative way of your credentials?
Well, I mean, I think that kind of speaks to something we touched on earlier, which is how do we make these tools readily accessible to the community where they're at, right? And so I think it's a matter of integration. If I recall correctly, there was recently an integration between Ceramic and DAO. Is there a way to kind of respond to that based on that recent update?
Try.
Okay.
So I think that the appropriate reputation depends on the context. Sometimes, so DAO House is basically they're using Ceramic to store first profiles, and profiles, profiles, but also credentials about which different DAOs you're participating in. And so you have to sort of build up this reputation as a DAO participant. In the future, DAOs can also start to use it to manage aspects of their community. And in a small DAO, qualitative reputation might actually be fine. Because early on, like you might just need a profile name and be able to recognize that there's just 10 of you in the DAO who's doing what, and you don't need a whole lot. And over time, you might have, more fuzzy or qualitative badges. It's as you get to higher and higher scales generally, or less and less familiarity, that you need much more quantitative measures, because now there's not kind of shared understanding and trust and the backbone of, we can police each other and monitor each other. So I talked earlier about kind of data, reputation, identity is kind of how I see the stack. I think creating all of these different credentials and pieces of data allows any given context, application, product, service, platform, whatever it is, to use any of that data and create the reputation that's right for them. And for some that might be a 5-star rating. For others it might be a single score. For others it might just be show the badges. So I don't think there's kind of a right path, or I think it depends on the context always.
Yeah, I think also standardizing. So there's an idea of schemas around verifiable credentials. So I worked on a product called Certo schemas, and that was aiming to allow apps and other entities to coordinate on how data should be structured for a given thing. And I think, Gloria, what y'all are doing is probably super relevant here as well. So there's first, like, how should we structure maybe a DAO contribution of some sort? Like what type of metadata should the industry of DAOs standardize on? I mean, these things are standardized in the real world in terms of licenses and diplomas and all of these things. There are these aggregates of a bunch of pieces of data structured in some way so that every other entity can recognize them and make things efficient. I think we're going to probably get to a point. I mean, I guess IDX also is doing very similar things. Like, how do we structure qualitative data to where it feels more quantitative a little bit? And so that's the first thing. And then it's like, I think what y'all are doing is like, how should we score these things? Which things, if presented together, what does it mean? And so I think both of those things we have to coordinate around. Maybe this is where token economic things come into play, to standardize, to incentivize us to coordinate on schemas, incentivize us to coordinate on reputation scoring models, and because, I think one of you just said it, which was, you'll have as many essentially reputations as you have interactions. That's the way I look at it, right? Like every single interaction, the other party might treat your reputation totally differently, right? Or at least slightly differently, right? And I think we're going to have tons of those models, right? And we need to, and for ease of use, for interoperability, I think we're going to, for admissions into a DAO or something like this, most of the DAOs can probably get away with all using a very standard one, so they don't have to build their own, right? And so we need to allow this free market emergence of for which context, what is the best process for evaluating your reputation, right? So yeah, I don't know if you want me to add to that.
Yeah, just briefly, I think as John was saying, there's a lot of context around how you actually determine reputation. And I have personal interest in understanding how hierarchical organizations support the work and how they actually can be better than the hierarchical organizations before. Right? One of the insights through the studies before was non-hierarchical organizations are really difficult to scale and to be sustainable because of the signaling is not always working. And that signaling is essential for recognizing different things, competencies, and reputations in the organization, let's say. So I think it's something really interesting for the crypto and Web3 space is that it's very interdisciplinary. So I think we need a lot of social scientists, right? Organizational behavior experts to actually come and join to model these things and tell us insights about how we can actually better interpret it and curate and organize human behaviors in a constructive way and work on certain DAOs. So yeah, I think that's something. It's not necessarily only the technical solution. It's actually also to involve other other experts from political science, from psychology, from organizational behavior studies to come and join us and build these reputation models.
I'll just say, I don't understand why there aren't just political science PhDs crawling around. But it is the richest treasure trove of data about designing political and social systems.
Right.
So yeah, if you know political science PhDs or anyone in that, bring them in. We need their minds.
Well, I think we may be running short on time, so I want to be respectful of that. If anyone has any more questions after this, please do reach out to any of the members of our panel. I think for me, what's really exciting is something that I don't recall who said it. I think Gloria, it was you in terms of DeFi has had its summer, NFTs, DAOs, right? But honestly, the demand for self-sovereign identity reputation keeps growing. And the one metric that to me stood out was Dr. Kelly Page and I were chatting before the event, and she shared that the distribution of the people that are attending Denver is 30% developers. Everyone else here is part of the community, right? The people that are actually using these products. So it's really exciting because I think that there's huge growth, there's huge demand, a lot of opportunity, and to the point that I think everyone's made here is your voice matters. Reach out, share what it is that you need to see so that we can implement that.